If you've gone through any kind of therapy, you've probably been asked at some point to challenge your negative thoughts. This is a key component of most therapies, and especially toolkit therapies like CBT or DBT. And it's so widely taught because it's very useful. Most of us are going to make negative assumptions sometimes because our brains are hardwired for threat detection in the interest of survival. And most of us can benefit from taking a step back and questioning our assumptions. But challenging negative thoughts, as most of us initially learn it, has its limitations. See, when most of us are taught to challenge negative thoughts, there's an underlying assumption there that the negative thought is false and that it will not hold up under review of evidence. So this technique is designed for things like, my friend didn't say hi to me, so she must hate me, or I made a mistake, so now I'm a worthless failure. Or even, I will definitely die in a car accident if I leave the house today. And these are big drivers for anxiety for a lot of people, including me. It matters that we be able to challenge them. But what are we supposed to do when we have, well, bigger problems? What are we supposed to do with our negative thoughts in the face of things like climate change and increasingly serious natural disasters? When we've become increasingly aware of systemic racism, sexism, ableism, queerphobia, when we know that people are being killed by both overt violence and quiet cruelty in every corner of the world, when more and more people can't afford to live in a society that sucks us dry. What can we do when our negative thoughts are true? Hey everyone, my name's Kate Kierrigan, and I am not a therapist. What I am is a neurodivergent person with a special interest in the brain, a complicated psych history, and over 15 years of therapy under my belt. I can't tell you how to manage your brain, but I can tell you what I've had to do for mine. So, as I said, challenging negative thoughts, really great tool, really useful for a lot of my anxiety stuff. But let's say I go to make a flow chart of how to work with negative thoughts. You can see that I have a big glaring question mark at the very first branch. If I review the evidence for my negative thought and the evidence indicates that that thought is pretty accurate, the hell am I supposed to do next? Well, I'm here making a video about it, so I do in fact have a way to proceed. All right, the main thing that I do is I help my brain manage the emotional and attentional weight that it's assigning to that thought. See, the thing about our brains and bodies is that we evolved to live in a world that's very different from the one we live in today. We evolved to handle what I call sprint stressors, so things like being attacked by a tiger. If I'm attacked by a tiger, I can run, I can hide, I can freeze, I can fight. But whichever option I choose, I want my whole attention to be focused on that tiger until the tiger goes away. And again, whichever option I choose, that tiger is going to stop being my problem within a fairly short window of time. But our modern stressors, and especially stressors like environmental destruction and systemic oppression, they're not sprint stressors, they're marathon stressors. These things are present in our lives over long periods of time, and they even exceed individual lifespans to affect multiple generations. Our brain's natural response to focus its whole attention on the stressor until it goes away, it doesn't work very well with marathon stressors. We need to be able to live our lives while these stressors are present, because this time, with all of its stressors, is the only time that we have to live in. So I have to accept that these negative things are true while also allowing myself to live a complete life and to not spend every waking moment in panic mode. It's a balancing act, and I have to extend myself a lot of grace and compassion while I do it. My preferred visual metaphor for this is a spider web. I imagine reality and this moment in reality as a vast spider's web. So every aspect of reality, every true thing about the universe and its contents is a single thread of that enormous web. The threads pulling in every direction create the shape of that web, and they hold its structure. So, whatever true thing I'm currently stressed about is a meaningful thread of the Great Web, but it is also only one thread. So, I imagine myself having walked far out along this stressful thread, and I imagine walking back to the center of my web. I imagine touching different threads in my web and grounding myself to different aspects of reality that exist at the same time. And I often use a physical grounding in combination with this. I'll touch the corners of a pendant or the spikes on my collar, the teeth of my keys, whatever I have handy. Now, I don't start with the threads that directly pull against the thread I'm stressing about. I found that when I try to start immediately challenging that thread directly, I end up in an internal argument instead of actually grounding myself. And also, when my attention is still dominated by the thing I'm stressed about, it's hard to find strong opposite threads, and they don't feel as real to me as the stressor does. Instead, I'm going to go at kind of an angle. And I'm going to pull up different realities that aren't directly related to my stressor. What I'm looking for here are things that are either positive or neutral to me, but that are solidly factual and interesting to me. I tend to grab some science facts and some positive anecdotes about humanity. Most of my factual negative thoughts are tied in some way to the shitty things that humans do. So I find it helpful to round out my perspective on humanity as well as on the world as a whole. And let's just go ahead and walk through one of these web groundings. So I'm currently stressed about the marginalization of queer people and the gamut of ways that various societies try to punish or vanish us. This is a real thing that is currently happening, not a misconception that I can talk myself out of. So first, I'm going to touch that thread for a moment. I will acknowledge that queer oppression is a real and pervasive problem, and that I don't know what the future holds for me or for other people like me. I'm going to allow myself to feel the emotions associated with that thought. Pain, fear, grief, rage, all of it. And now I'm going to touch some other threads. There are fungi living in the roots of plant systems that allow them to absorb nutrients from the soil and communicate with other plants. Plants use salicylic acid and its derivatives as anti-inflammatory hormones. We share a lot of those cellular mechanisms from our ancient shared ancestry, and that's why drugs like aspirin are effective for us. Humans developed chocolate. Chocolate is a complex process of crystallizing fats and sugars as well as incorporating the fragrant cocoa compounds. They developed this process without a modern understanding of molecular structure, and it added something extraordinary to the world. There's a phenomenon called whale fall, where the decaying remains of massive ocean animals like whales gradually sink into the deepest parts of the ocean, and they help to sustain those abyssal ecosystems. Humans are capable of strong and absurd emotional bonds, like the affection that NASA scientists had for the Curiosity probe. A species that throws a birthday party for a robot and uses its advanced scientific equipment to play Happy Birthday on Mars. It can't be all that bad. Now that my web feels bigger and my attention isn't as fully dominated by the knowledge of queer people's suffering, I can touch some threads that pull directly against that thread, and I can accept that those are real too. So, while systems of oppression are real, so are the people fighting them. People have been fighting these systems for longer than I've been alive, and every increment of progress we can make helps someone. I do not have to solve these problems by myself. People cooperate in social change because a variety of skill sets and knowledge bases are needed in order to make these changes. I can find ways to support the people who are already leading these fights, and what I can contribute matters. The world has been shit for queer people in many times in many places throughout history. In every time and place where our ancestors fought for equality, they have also been human. They have made art, gone dancing, had pets, built relationships, and they felt more than just pain in their lives. It's okay to be human while trying to build a better world. It may even be necessary. And now I'm back in the center of my web, feeling the whole thing instead of just being overwhelmed by that one thread. This return to the center is what I call the fast step of dealing with negative thoughts that are true. This is the part that I can do while I have a meeting in 5 minutes or while I need to get home from the grocery store. There are other steps, 2 of them, that I call the slow steps. And these are ones that I work on when I can carve out a chunk of time. The first slow step is problem solving. Are there actionable items that I can do to push back against this negative reality? These action items don't have to solve the whole problem, but they do just need to chip away at it or reduce its harm. The thing is, our brains really want to do something. That's part of why we have these emotional responses, to motivate us toward action. Even small actions that move us closer to a goal can help soothe the brain. Also, situations are a lot more likely to improve if I actually do something about them. For something like that ever-present risk of dying in a car accident, there are steps I can take to reduce that risk, even if I can never bring the risk to zero. I can avoid situations that I know are risky for me, even if they're situations that most people are fine with. There are sections of the highway in my hometown that I find overwhelming, and I don't drive on those. I find other routes. I don't drive on the highway at all if I'm tired, emotionally unstable, sick, or struggling with weather conditions. Surface streets operate at a speed that is much more reasonable for my reaction time, and the periodic stopping helps me pay attention. Is this without downsides? Absolutely not. Sometimes it takes me an hour to get home instead of the 20 minutes that it would have taken by highway because I opted for surface streets. But I can also live with taking an hour to get home better than I can live through a high-speed collision. Now, for things like systemic oppression and climate change, my action items are admittedly very small compared to the scale of the issues. I find groups who are already fighting these issues and I donate what I can to them. I exchange care with my friends who are also members of various marginalized groups. We provide emotional support to each other, share information, and help each other find little joys that keep us going. I recently connected with my local chapter of the American Humanist Association so that I can give time and resources to helping our broader community, especially people who are most affected by the current everything. If you, like me, struggle with this whole concept of connecting with your community, the American Humanist Association is a great place to start and a great place to find community service efforts that you are able to contribute to. So that's the problem-solving piece. The other slow step is a little less intuitive, but I found it to be hugely important for my journey. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into that spider web I visualized earlier, back to that thread that was stressing me out, and I'm going to explore the emotions that I have attached to it. See, this is the other tricky thing about our thoughts and the way that they exist in our brains. Just because the thought itself is true, that doesn't mean that every emotion, expectation, or belief we have tied to that thought is equally in line with reality. One of my favorite media illustrations of this happens in Pixar's Turning Red. So our protagonist, May, has developed the ability to turn into a giant red panda, and many people have emotions about it. Early on in the movie, May's mother, Ming, predicts that if May gets to go to a certain concert, she will become emotional and she will panda all over the place. And as the plot of the movie turns out, Ming's direct prediction is correct. May has a bunch of emotions at the concert, and she does in fact panda all over the place. But was that all Ming was really afraid of? The thing about this prediction is that May's fears didn't begin and end with the exact words that came out of her mouth. Her biggest fears were ones that she didn't specifically verbalize. She was afraid that May would be harmed, or that May would harm someone else, that their family wouldn't be safe and accepted in their neighborhood anymore, that no one would accept someone like May if the truth came out. And those expectations, while they follow logically from Ming's own life experiences, don't end up being true in her family's current life. The panda was real, but the anticipated suffering was not. So let's say that I go down my climate change is happening thread, and I feel a paralyzing fear and dread associated with this thought. It's hard to judge immediately whether this fear is rational, but it's definitely intense enough to cause me some problems, especially if I want to do some problem solving on this issue. I can't do as much problem solving when I'm this paralyzed by dread. So I need to explore this fear, which means exploring any unspoken expectations I'm carrying with it. Climate change is happening, but what else am I expecting to happen in the future because of it? Not what do I think is the probable outcome, but what are the scenarios that instantly pop into my head when I try to imagine that future? My knee-jerk expectation of a future with climate change is that it looks like a Mad Max film. I expect to not have access to food, water, or shelter, much less all the medical care that I need to survive. I expect society to fall apart and people to be wildly cruel to each other, and I expect to die horribly, either from starvation or illness, or from being gruesomely murdered. And the thing about this image of the future is that while I can't say the probability is zero, it's also far from the only possibility. It isn't a tangible fact the same way that climate change is. There are a huge range of ways that the future could turn out. And so I remember that there are numerous possibilities in between everything is fine and abject misery until I die horribly. And I contemplate a few of those. We might find ways to adapt our societies to a changing world. Life might have to change, but not in purely horrific ways. I much prefer living in a world with all of my favorite foods and all the conveniences of my current life, but if I had to, I could probably build a happy life for myself again in a world that looked different. We might have collapses of large-scale societies, but be able to maintain local societies that end up being okay in many ways. Systemic disruptions will affect me harder than many other people because of my complex medical needs, but I could probably still adapt. And even if losing access to all my medications actually did kill me, which it could, dying in a community that cares for each other, but has suffered some unfortunate medical setbacks, is a very different outcome than dying in a Mad Max apocalypse. Hell, we might even pivot hard enough and fast enough in reaction to the shock of current events that we get to keep our large societies, trade networks, medical advancements, all while answering the problem of climate change. I might be able to maintain most of the things that keep my quality of life high, have time and energy to create the art I want to create, and even find someone to share that life with me. And I remind myself that these other possible futures are about as real as the one that I'm afraid of. Not impossible, and not a current fact either. As I shuffle my expectations around to account for this range of possibilities, that fear starts to ease up. It's like a wound becoming less inflamed after I remove the embedded splinter. This is the end of that web metaphor, and it used to be the end of my flowchart. However, after a particularly stubborn, depressive episode, I've added in a little finishing step, and I've added this onto both the fast process and the slow processes. It goes like this. I imagine a future where my fears have come true. We are in a full Mad Max world. I am suffering and inching closer to death. Everything is horrible. And then I ask myself two questions. Question 1. Can I control my outcomes in that future based on what I do right now? I mean, there's a part of me that thinks I can, but that part is confused. In order to problem solve and come up with a good strategy, I need a lot of information about myself, my environment, my circumstances, and the other people around me. I don't have that information for the world 2 days from now, let alone one that's decades from now. So as tempting as it is to say, yes, I can control that, the answer is actually no. No matter how much effort I put in right now, I cannot solve the problem of how to survive a Mad Max future. Now, question one might sound familiar. I've certainly had a lot of therapists prompt me with this one over the years, and it's been very helpful in a lot of situations, including situations dealing with true negative thoughts. But it wasn't shaking my depression that day. I was just feeling helpless and therefore worse about my life. So then comes question two. If that terrible future really does come, and I turn out to have spent years of my normalish life worrying about it, mentally inhabiting that future for years before it became a physical reality, how would I feel about that? The answer is that I would be furious. It's bad enough to go through something painful once. Mentally pre-living it for years is absolute horseshit. So I glare into that unknowable future and I say, fuck you. Whatever might happen someday, you can't make me suffer it twice. And then I have a shocking amount of motivation to go enjoy a nice lunch, play with my cat, and answer my emails. So my current process for dealing with negative thoughts that are true ends up looking like this. I'm going to leave it there for today. Please like the video if you enjoyed it or found it helpful. Share it with a friend who has aged a decade in the last month, and I'll be back soon with a new video.